Outside of Time Episode 3. In the previous episode, Xu Qing finally stepped out of the icy boundary of the Forbidden Zone and into the warmth of the outside world. Along the way, he silently observed the scavengers who had brought him this far, discovering both their ruthlessness and the rare kindness of Captain Lei. Around the campfire, he learned unsettling truths, from the brutal fate of treasure nurturers to the distant dream of reaching the ancestral Wanggu lands. Yet, what mattered most was the old captain's guidance. Strength ruled this world, and only those who survived earned the right to live. As they continued their journey, one by one the temporary scavenger companions drifted away, until only Xu Qing and Captain Lei remained. On the final night, the old man revealed the truth about the scavenger campsite ahead, a place of danger, opportunity, and harsh rules. To stay there, any newcomer must pass a beast fight, a trial set by the camp's leader. And at the end of the previous episode, Captain Lei looked at Xu Qing and offered him a place to stay if he survived. What will happen next? Stay tuned. And the story continues. The Nanwang continent was very vast. If one gazed down from above, one could see that the Nanwang continent looked like an irregular oval-shaped chessboard that was surrounded by seas. From this immense panorama, the land separated itself from the distant Wanggu continent like a colossal island. Yet despite being isolated by an endless sea, its sheer size was overwhelming, so vast that most people would never finish traversing it within a single lifetime. But its immensity came with danger. Much of the land was barren, mutated, or hostile to human life. Cutting across the continent, the Truth Mountain Range sprawled diagonally, forming a natural barrier that divided civilization from wilderness. And in the southwest region of that mountain range stretched a forbidden zone so huge that it occupied nearly 70% of the entire continent. Only the northeast side of the range could sustain human life. And even there, treacherous smaller forbidden zones dotted the land like black scars. Cities, both great and humble, filled this surviving region. But while the cities were dense and lively, nobody willingly built their homes near forbidden zones. Only desperate outlaws, wanderers, and discarded souls camped at their borders, where survival came at the edge of a blade. From such desperation, scavenger camps were formed, chaotic, dangerous, and always temporary, growing like weeds around every forbidden patch. It was toward one of these camps that Xu Qing followed Captain Lei. From a mountain peak overlooking the plains, Xu Qing gazed at the settlement below. It wasn't large, just a few hundred people, but at dawn it buzzed with life. Cooking smoke curled into the air, while shouts, laughter, quarrels, and the clamor of trade carried across the land. The camp's structure reflected its social order. The inner area held sturdier wooden huts, while the outer ring was nothing but ragged tents. Behind it lay a pitch-black jungle where mist and shadows hid unknown terrors. Even under the rising sun, no light penetrated its depths. Captain Lei asked quietly what Xu Qing thought of the place. Xu Qing replied that it reminded him of the slums. Captain Lei only smiled. As they descended the mountain slope, Xu Qing noticed small groups of scavengers coming and going. All wore similar deep gray leather coats, and every one of them greeted Captain Lei with reverence. Their respectful gazes at the man, and their curious glances at Xu Qing, stirred more questions in the youth's heart about who Captain Lei truly was. When they entered the camp, Xu Qing felt an immediate wave of harshness. Dust, garbage, and dead leaves choked the ground. Shouts and curses filled the air. Yet despite the chaos, the environment felt strangely familiar to Xu Qing, raw, dirty, and merciless, like the slums he had survived in. He scanned the people. Muscular warriors like broken ox sat around, their bodies hardened by years of brutal living. Some youths basked in the sun atop rocks. Others sparred or traded barbed words. Old scavengers who could barely open their eyes still commanded fear. Some people emerged from feathered tents, adjusting their clothing after indulging in pleasure. A half-dressed woman even stepped out, smiling lazily and waving at him. Captain Lei told Xu Qing not to look, but Xu Qing calmly responded that he knew exactly what that place was. Eventually, they reached the center of the camp where an enormous wooden ring-shaped structure towered above the surroundings, the beast fight arena. Xu Qing studied it with quiet focus. The central field was large, surrounded by rows of rough, tall wooden seats. From inside came the roars of beasts. Scavengers in cleaner clothes lingered around the arena's outer sheds, talking and laughing. A thin man with a three-stroke beard approached Captain Lei. With spirit energy flickering faintly from his body, he displayed a perfunctory smile. He dismissed Xu Qing with a glance, then asked whether the youth was new. Captain Lei told him that the boy already understood the rules and that his name was simply Kid. The man laughed and said that Kid was fortunate. The arena already had several candidates, so he would probably be scheduled to fight tomorrow. Captain Lei gave Xu Qing a final look, a look filled with a mix of expectation and something deeper. Xu Qing nodded, understanding that from this moment on, he would be on his own. He was brought to a wooden shed where the candidates for the upcoming beast fights were kept. Inside were 4 other youths, 3 boys and 1 girl, all around his age. The older boys looked Xu Qing over but quickly lost interest. The youngest girl huddled in a corner, fear evident in her eyes, a scar cutting across her face. The oldest boy, once a scavenger from another camp, eyed the girl with predatory intent but held back since he had no residency rights yet. Xu Qing remained silent. He chose a spot near the door, sat down, and meditated, ignoring their chatter. Gradually they forgot he was there and began discussing the upcoming martial trials. Through their conversation, Xu Qing learned the rules. Every time enough people gathered, the camp hosted a martial training session. Participants entered the beast fight arena to fight mutated beasts. The outcomes were simple and brutal: kill the beast and earn residency rights, or die and become its food. The spectators would bet, drink, laugh, and cheer at the slaughter. Human lives were entertainment here. When the youths talked about the recent calamity where the god opened its eyes, they questioned whether the little girl was truly the lone survivor. Trembling, she confirmed it. Xu Qing opened his eyes briefly. He understood survival better than most. He had seen that disaster firsthand. Anyone who lived through it was not as fragile as they looked. Night passed, and with morning came noise from outside. The door opened, letting in sharp sunlight. A scavenger ordered them to follow him. Today's event would begin soon. The eager young scavenger rushed forward, excited. The others followed nervously. Xu Qing came next, steady and composed. The little girl was last, her shadow swallowed by the scavenger's silhouette. As they approached the arena, the roar of the crowd intensified. When they stepped inside, the sound exploded around them. Over 100 spectators filled the wooden seats, shouting and laughing with bloodthirsty excitement. The little girl trembled. The 2 lesser boys went pale. Only the cocky scavenger youth smiled with anticipation. Xu Qing, however, studied the battleground calmly. He noted every structural detail: the lack of cover, the tight space that prevented movement, the tall fences, and the few tunnel gates where beasts would be released. He analyzed the potential strategies. Nothing about this place favored survival. And as he took in the crowd, the arena, and the looming gates of the beast tunnels, Xu Qing made his final assessment. So, either I borrow the cheers and shouts of the audience to frighten the beast, while I find an opportunity to act, but that might end up backfiring as it could cause the ferocious beast to rage. Or I end things as swiftly as possible, as that would be the most advantageous. While Xu Qing was observing the environment of the fighting area, the sounds of cheering from the crowd echoed out. The entrance, where Xu Qing and the others had walked into earlier, now let out a booming sound as a huge gate slammed down. A thick cloud of dust surged upward from the impact, rolling across the ground like a wave. That thunderous crash was the signal the gathered scavengers had been waiting for. It was as if the arena itself had awakened, and the crowd erupted with renewed excitement. Their hoots, whistles, and wild shouting washed over Xu Qing in chaotic storms of noise. As the dust settled, Xu Qing's attention shifted toward the tall platform overlooking the arena. Seated in the highest position was a middle-aged man dressed in simple cotton clothes. Yet despite the plainness of his attire, he radiated a pressure unlike anyone Xu Qing had ever encountered. A group of attendants stood behind him, emphasizing his importance. Even from this long distance, Xu Qing could feel the overwhelming wave of spiritual energy coming from the man. That dense presence made his instincts tighten, and a single thought formed in his mind: this must be the camp leader. His suspicion was further confirmed when he noticed the man with the three-stroke beard from the previous day standing respectfully at the camp leader's side, bowing his head as he reported in a careful tone. After taking the seat of honor, the camp leader gave a subtle gesture. Immediately, the man with the three-stroke beard stepped to the edge of the platform and signaled the workers below. A wooden gate at the boundary of the beast-fight arena creaked loudly, then swung open, and before the sound had fully faded, a violent wave of roars burst out from inside. The noise alone made the wooden stands vibrate. A procession of scavengers emerged through the gate carrying large metal cages, each cage held by a team of 3 men. The cages rattled with the ferocious, almost maddened movements of the beasts inside. The crowd roared even louder at the sight, some cheering, some shouting encouragement, and others shouting bets to their neighbors. Xu Qing's eyes sharpened as he studied each cage. He saw 2 giant wolves, one slightly larger but both alike in their pitch-black fur and blood-red eyes. Their fangs gleamed wetly, and strings of saliva dripped to the floor. Each time they slammed their bodies against the cage bars, the metal shuddered, as if barely able to contain them. Their snarls intensified when their gazes fell upon Xu Qing and the other combatants. The next cage held a red-furred bear. Its sheer size made the wolves seem small. Its arms were thicker than a grown man's thigh, and every time it swung its paw against the bars, the 3 men carrying it nearly lost their balance. The bear's eyes flashed with rage, and it let out a deep, thunderous roar that rolled through the arena like distant thunder. But the final cage in the first row was different. Inside was a gibbon covered in swollen pustules. Its entire body looked diseased, mottled with bulging sacs that seemed ready to burst at the slightest touch. The creature trembled violently, slamming its frame repeatedly against the cage. Each impact caused several pustules to rupture, spilling foul-looking liquid. The audience shrieked in delight and disgust at the grotesque display. Beside Xu Qing, the 2 inexperienced youths who had entered the arena with him turned pale. Their knees quivered, and the little girl standing behind them shivered uncontrollably. Even the youth who had once been a scavenger, the most confident among the group, seemed to lose his bravado upon seeing the lineup of beasts. Still, something was wrong. Xu Qing could feel it. There were only 4 cages. He turned to glance back at the tunnel, and the moment his eyes passed over the shadowed interior, the roaring beasts suddenly went silent, as if sensing a greater predator. They shrank back, their bodies stiffening. Then the ground vibrated with heavy steps. Another cage appeared. This one was carried by 6 men, all straining beneath its weight. The cage was nearly double the size of the previous ones. As it passed into the arena, the entire crowd screamed in shock and excitement. "Giant horn python," someone shouted. "The camp leader really captured one. To those kids, whoever draws it will die for sure. Even when we encounter one in the wild, we need at least 2 people willing to risk their lives to kill it." Inside the massive cage lay a giant python, thick as an adult human's waist. Its body was a mottled blend of gray and black, with dark patterns resembling jagged mountain peaks. At first, it appeared still, almost resting, but then its head lifted slowly, revealing its cold, yellow vertical pupils. Those eyes swept across the arena, and under its gaze, all the other beasts trembled uncontrollably. Even the raging red-furred bear backed itself to the farthest corner of its cage, growling lowly in fear. Behind Xu Qing, the 2 youths immediately whispered in panic, "Please let me avoid it, please let me avoid it." Their voices were barely audible, trembling with pure desperation. But Xu Qing did not look away. Instead, a faint light flickered in his eyes. He remembered this creature from the slums. Someone had once dragged the corpse of a giant horn python back from a hunt. The experienced hunters spoke of its terrifying strength, how its coils could snap logs like twigs, how its skin was so thick that weapons often broke before piercing it. But they also spoke of its weaknesses. It was clumsy, slow, predictable, and more importantly, its gallbladder held potent medicinal value. It could cleanse tainted blood. It could soothe the corruption building inside one's body. Even the meat was nourishing. As he thought of this, Xu Qing remembered Captain Lei's fondness for snake meat. His tongue subconsciously brushed across his lips. He also remembered the growing pain around the mutation point on his body. If he could obtain the python's gallbladder, he might be able to ease that corruption before it worsened. While he was immersed in thought, the lot drawing began. A scavenger approached them carrying 5 bamboo slips, each labeled with the name of one of the beasts. One by one, the combatants reached out. The older youth drew first. Relief washed visibly over him. The 2 younger boys were next, their faces tight with fear as they picked their lots. Both looked miserable at whatever fate they had received. Then the little girl stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she pulled a bamboo slip from the bundle. Her face turned ashen the moment she saw what was written on it. Giant horn python. The slip shaking in her hand said everything. That left one remaining bamboo slip. The weakest beast of the group, the smaller wolf. Xu Qing accepted it silently, though his brow tightened in thought. The scavenger who handled the drawing soon left. The 5 combatants were led behind a barricade at the edge of the arena, out of sight. But close enough to hear the deafening roar of the crowd. The atmosphere swelled with anticipation. Very soon, the scavenger departed. They, the combatants, were then arranged behind a corner barricade. As the cheering of the surrounding audience rang out, the first match began. The person arranged to make an entrance was one of the 2 youths. He walked out shivering. The ferocious beast set against him was none other than that muscular red bear. The young boy staggered forward into the arena as though his legs might give out at any moment. The crowd's roars swelled around him, but he looked too terrified to notice any of it. Ahead of him, the iron cage thudded open, and the massive red-furred bear stepped out with a deep, rumbling growl. The beast lifted its head, sniffing the air, its heavy muscles rippling beneath its thick coat. When its crimson eyes locked onto the trembling youth, the outcome seemed determined even before the fight began. The battle was brutally short. The youth managed only a few frantic, clumsy swings with his weapon, each easily brushed aside by the giant bear. Its strength was overwhelming. In just a handful of heartbeats, the bear lunged, pinned him, and tore him apart with horrifying ease. Blood sprayed in all directions, spattering across the sand and drawing gasps, curses, and shouts from the watching scavengers. The crowd buzzed with regret, excitement, and frustration, all emotions stirred by a death that felt both swift and inevitable. Seeing this, the second youth's terror broke loose. His body shook uncontrollably, and before his turn could arrive, he screamed that he wanted to give up. The arena immediately filled with booing and insults. The scavengers dragged him away, and anyone watching knew well what abandoning the match meant. His fate needed no explanation. The third contestant was the older scavenger youth. He strode out with gritted teeth, fear mixing with hardened experience. His opponent was the larger of the 2 black wolves. Compared to the others, this youth had fought beasts before. He knew their strength, their habits, and how to risk his life without hesitation. The battle was fierce, with both human and wolf lunging, rolling, striking, and bleeding across the arena floor. After a grueling exchange, the youth finally managed to deliver the killing blow. Collapsing to one knee afterward while gasping for breath, he became the first successful case in this round of martial training. And as the gate opened for him, he staggered out clutching his wounds, but alive. Next came the 4th match. The little girl stood trembling as scavengers unlocked the colossal cage of the giant horned python. The monstrous serpent slid out slowly, its horned head rising high, its thick scaled body dragging across the metal with a grinding sound. Its cold yellow eyes surveyed the arena, and the girl's despair was plain on her face. She forced herself forward, but her steps were unsteady, as though each movement was a battle she had already lost. Just as she passed Xu Qing, he suddenly spoke. "Let us swap." She froze, startled, unable to process the meaning before Xu Qing exchanged the bamboo slips. Without waiting for her gratitude or protest, he walked toward the python's cage with the slip naming the most dangerous beast in the arena. His calmness caused an uproar among the spectators. They had watched the earlier matches, they knew exactly what this change meant. Some shouted in surprise, others in disbelief, but most of the crowd simply watched with cold indifference. Life or death was a personal choice. No one, not even the camp leader, cared enough to intervene. Xu Qing stepped into the beast fight arena with measured steps. Ahead of him, the giant horned python uncoiled from its resting position. It lowered its head slightly, studying him with a wary intelligence far beyond ordinary beasts. The audience's shouting dimmed, replaced with a tense silence as the serpent's massive body slid fully out of the cage, its weight making the ground tremble. Sensing something different about the youth approaching it, the python refrained from striking immediately. Instead, it coiled tightly outside the cage and lifted its head high. Preparing to gauge this new opponent, Xu Qing continued walking closer, his expression steady and cold, his gaze locked onto the serpent's underside. When he stepped into the python's attack range, the beast reacted with sudden violence. Its tail slammed down with a thunderous crack, launching its enormous body forward. The snake's jaws yawned wide, revealing rows of glistening fangs and a foul wave of breath as it lunged to swallow him whole. Xu Qing watched it approach with narrowed eyes. At the last instant, just before the serpent's mouth could engulf him, he dodged aside, but he did not counterattack. Instead, he focused all his attention on the python's belly, examining its movements, its weaknesses, and the rhythm of its hunting instincts. Missing its prey, the python hissed in irritation and twisted sharply. Its tail crashed down again, propelling it forward with incredible force. The speed of the second strike far surpassed the first. Its head curved around to meet its tail, forming a deadly circle meant to trap and crush him within its coils. Xu Qing remained silent. When the tail came close, he clenched his fist and punched with all the strength granted by the first level of his physical cultivation art. The impact sent the serpent's tail whipping backward. The blow was not fatal, but it disrupted the python's rhythm. Drawing out its fury, its eyes turned blood red, and it hurled its head toward him again in a crazed attempt to end the fight. By then, Xu Qing had identified what he was looking for. Choosing to advance instead of retreating, he moved toward the serpent, leaping onto the thick middle section of its body. His fists rained down in rapid succession, one punch after another, each aimed at the weaker scales along its underside. The python thrashed violently, trying to coil around him, but every punch forced it backward. Soon, cracks appeared between the scales, and blood began seeping out. Its pained roars echoed across the arena. With the weak point exposed, Xu Qing did not hesitate. His left hand shot toward the dagger on his thigh. The blade flashed with a cold glint as he drove it into the serpent's wounded belly. The dagger sliced through flesh, widening the wound enough for him to thrust his hand into the cavity. The python shrieked as Xu Qing's fingers closed around the small gallbladder hidden within. Though the serpent was enormous, the gallbladder was only the size of an egg. With a fierce yank, he tore it free and pulled his blood-soaked hand out as the python writhed in agony. Without a flinch, Xu Qing placed the gallbladder in his mouth and swallowed it whole. Ignoring the warm blood covering his clothes, arms, and face, the arena erupted with disbelief. Even experienced adults rarely consumed a gallbladder so cleanly. For a child to do it with such chilling composure was almost unnatural. Driven mad by pain, the python whipped its head toward Xu Qing with renewed frenzy. Its mournful shrieks filled the arena, and sand exploded around it as it slammed its massive body against the ground. But Xu Qing glared back coldly. As the serpent lunged again, he leapt upward, avoiding the attack, and conjured the black iron stick into his hand. As he descended, he gathered every ounce of strength, momentum, and weight, plunging the iron stick downward into the serpent's heart. The scales cracked under the force, and the iron pierced through. A deep explosive thud echoed as the python's entire form convulsed violently. Its head crashed to the ground, its tail twitching weakly until the movement finally faded into stillness. Silence washed over the spectators. Dust settled slowly as Xu Qing stood over the corpse, pulling his iron stick free. Many scavengers rose to their feet in shock. They had seen beast fights for years, but this was no simple victory. It was a ruthless, Efficient hunt, executed by a thin, small youth whose expression had never once shifted from its icy calm. The remaining beasts in their cages trembled in fear. Even the red bear cowered. Xu Qing sheathed his iron stick, grabbed the serpent's torn flesh near its wound, and dragged the python's enormous corpse behind him as he walked toward the arena's gate. A long streak of blood marked his path, startling everyone who watched. He paused at the gate and glanced up at the elevated platform. The man with the three-stroke beard needed a moment to recover before hurriedly signaling for the gate to open. The heavy doors rumbled, then parted. Outside, Captain Lei leaned casually against the wall with his arms crossed, a faint smile hinting that he had been waiting for some time. "Can I stay at your place now?" Xu Qing asked, still dragging the corpse. "You can," Captain Lei replied with a grin. Xu Qing nodded and tossed the serpent's massive body toward him. "Since you like to eat snakes, this is my treat to you." Captain Lei froze for a heartbeat, then burst into booming laughter as he caught the python's corpse. Still laughing, he placed a hand on Xu Qing's shoulder and walked away with him, leaving the arena behind. Only after the two had disappeared into the distance did the spectators finally erupt into a thunderous uproar. In a shadowed corner of the crowd, where no one seemed able to perceive their presence, an old man in purple robes sat beside an expressionless middle-aged servant marked with a 5-point star on his forehead. Their bearing and clothing made them seem alien to the rough camp environment. The old man observed Xu Qing's fading silhouette, eyes filled with a hidden brilliance. The old man had a rosy face, and there seemed to be lightning concealed in his gaze. It felt like everything could be destroyed if he unleashed it. All in all, his entire being was extremely extraordinary. At this moment, he sat there and stared at the departing back of Xu Qing as he couldn't help but laugh. "This youth is pretty interesting." At the scavenger campsite, Captain Lei walked in front while Xu Qing followed. The sunlight was currently streaming down, landing on them. As the two of them moved through the camp, their silhouettes, one tall and seasoned, the other small and youthful, created a surprising sense of harmony against the harsh world around them. Xu Qing could feel that harmony as warmth, something rare in his life. Every now and then he glanced at the massive python corpse Captain Lei carried, and the sight only heightened the hunger growing inside him. He loved the taste of snake meat, and he couldn't deny that his mouth was already watering. Captain Lei lived in the central ring of the scavenger campsite, an area far better than the slums where Xu Qing had grown up. The stone and wood houses were modest but sturdy, and the small courtyard behind the bamboo gate felt like a luxury beyond anything Xu Qing had ever imagined. When Captain Lei pointed to one of the tiny rooms and told him he could live there from now on, Xu Qing silently absorbed the kindness. The room was simple: a bed, a quilt, a table, a single chair, but everything was clean, orderly, and sun-dried. That familiarity and visibility made him feel safe. He preferred small spaces where nothing could hide from his sight. Instead of lying on the bed, he settled on the floor and began his cultivation. As he focused on breathing and guiding the spirit energy, the sound of oil crackling drifted in from the next room. A wave of rich aroma soon followed, snake meat being fried, braised, steamed, and his stomach growled so loudly he had to force himself to close his eyes and continue his routine. It had been far too long since he had smelled food like this. Time passed until the sky dimmed toward evening. When Captain Lei finally called him to eat, Xu Qing jumped up and hurried out of the room. On the table he found an entire feast: deep-fried snake, braised snake, steamed snake, snake soup, and other dishes he didn't even have names for. Captain Lei really could cook. But then Xu Qing noticed something that caused him to stop. 3 sets of chopsticks and bowls had been placed on the table. Captain Lei noticed his hesitation and explained quietly that the 3rd set was a habit, a place for someone who would never return. Xu Qing didn't ask further. The sadness in the old man's eyes told him enough. Only after that did he sit down and reach for the deep-fried meat. Burning his tongue but savoring every bite, he ate quickly, ravenously, in stark contrast to Captain Lei, who only tasted a little of each dish with slow, deliberate motions. When Xu Qing stretched his hand toward another plate with his fingers, Captain Lei coughed and reminded him to use chopsticks. Xu Qing obeyed, clumsy but determined. Watching him, Captain Lei remarked that Xu Qing had eaten the bun he gave him before with tiny bites. "Not like this," Xu Qing answered simply. "The buns belong to you. But this snake meat belongs to me." In his mind, anything given to him was precious. But something he had earned, like the python, was something he could eat without restraint. Even so, Xu Qing only ate from the dishes placed in front of him and drank the soup conservatively, never touching the portions that seemed to belong to Captain Lei. Noticing this, Captain Lei chuckled and told him that the python would feed them for half a month. And the bones and skin were valuable as well. Xu Qing immediately replied that he would pay rent and that this meal should not be counted as part of it. In his heart, everything had to be balanced. Gifts were to be repaid, debts to be honored, favors to be remembered. After a moment, Captain Lei spoke again, explaining that the others in the camp called him Captain Lei, but his real name didn't matter. In places like this, few used their true names. He revealed that he led a small scavenger team called Thunder, 4 members in total including himself. The other 3 were still out on missions. When they returned, he planned to introduce Xu Qing to them and, eventually, let him join. With the team, Xu Qing would have stability, work, and resources to grow stronger. Xu Qing accepted without hesitation. He understood that no kindness in the slums came without purpose. If Captain Lei had saved him and given him shelter, then this was the reason, and he was willing. Captain Lei stood up, coughing lightly, and reminded Xu Qing not to cultivate too aggressively. The spirit energy of this world was mixed with poisonous elements, and cultivating recklessly could speed up the risk of mutation. Still, he admitted that hard cultivation was also necessary. Living beside a forbidden zone meant danger was always close, and Xu Qing would one day need to brave that darkness as well. After the old man left, Xu Qing carefully cleaned the dishes before returning to his little room. He sat down once more and resumed his cultivation. He knew that in this new environment, filled with rogue cultivators, fugitives, and dangerous wanderers, strength was everything. In the slums, one might be a starving dog. Here, one was a wolf or prey for wolves. If he didn't grow stronger, he would die long before mutation ever claimed him. He also remembered something else. The anomalous substances inside him could be suppressed with certain alchemy pills. One of the pills, white pills, required ingredients commonly found in the nearby forbidden zone. That meant there would be sellers in the campsite. His path forward was clear. He touched the spot where the purple crystal rested against his chest. It had already changed him, boosting his recovery, sharpening his senses, and enhancing his physical power far beyond what the first level of his cultivation technique should have provided. The bamboo slip had said a cultivator at that stage should have the strength of a tiger. Xu Qing suspected he could defeat many tigers now. Tonight, he intended to break through again. He calmed his breathing, relaxing his body and drawing in the purest spirit energy from the air. Outside the forbidden zone, the energy was cleaner, far less polluted. That alone made cultivation smoother. As he breathed and pulled the power inward, faint purple light shimmered beneath his coat, and subtle popping sounds echoed through his body as impurities seeped out of his pores. Elsewhere, a small figure approached in the night. The little girl whose bamboo stick he had taken earlier stood outside the courtyard gate. Mustering her courage, she knocked softly, but the sound was so faint that it vanished into the air, unheard. Inside, Xu Qing's energy circulation reached a peak. Pressure built in his body, a deep internal rumble growing stronger, and the purple light inside him pulsed like a heartbeat. As a rumbling sound roared in his mind, Xu Qing opened his eyes. At this moment, purple light flashed in his eyes once again as joy appeared on his face. He then lowered his head and glanced at his arm. The second mutation point had appeared there. The second level of qi condensation. "I've finally broken through." Xu Qing stood up and punched out, producing a crisp sound echoing through the air. In fact, the blast of wind even caused the door to the house to shake a little. In that quiet room, the sudden vibration surprised him. He stared at his own fist, astonished at how much stronger he had become in just one night. His body felt lighter, more responsive, almost as if every tendon and muscle had been reforged. If he were to face the giant horned snake again, he was certain that a single punch would pierce straight through its belly scales. His senses had also sharpened, the world looked clearer, edges more defined, and even faint sounds reached him with startling precision. It was because of this heightened perception that he noticed the soft knocking drifting from outside the courtyard. Curious, he stepped to the side of the door and peered through a narrow gap. Under the dim moonlight, he saw a small, trembling figure. It was the little girl from before, her body dotted with minor injuries. Perhaps from wandering alone through the scavenger camp at night. She was knocking timidly, barely making a sound. Xu Qing frowned. He had no intention of involving himself in other people's problems, especially when he was still struggling with his own. Yet the girl stayed there, knocking again and again with that faint persistence that made it impossible to pretend he hadn't heard. After a long moment, he finally pushed open the door and stepped outside. The girl stiffened at the sight of him. Fear flickered in her eyes, though she stood her ground as she held tightly to the bamboo gate. He asked softly, "Is something the matter?" Her words tumbled out in hesitant fragments. She explained that she had secured the residency right to stay inside the scavenger campsite and had even found a job there. It was clear she wanted him to know she had managed to gain a foothold. He nodded as though acknowledging a simple fact. Understood. With that, he began turning back toward the house. But the girl called out abruptly, her voice cracking under nervous strain. "Wait, thank you. I came here to thank you." He paused briefly but shook his head. "No need to thank me. I wanted the snake. It had nothing to do with you." After speaking, he returned inside, the matter already dismissed in his mind. Yet behind him, the girl gathered all her courage and shouted into the night, "No matter what, I still have to thank you. This debt, I will repay it one day." Then she fled into the darkness, her small figure swallowed by the moonlit paths. Xu Qing gave the empty courtyard a brief glance before closing the door. He wasn't affected by her words. His focus quickly shifted inward again, toward the subtle but constant sting pulsing from his left arm. The anomalous substances inside him were still accumulating. Even the snake gall he had eaten had barely eased the buildup. That told him how dangerous the contamination already was. Inside his room, he looked at the neat bedding and the layer of grime covering his clothes. After thinking for a moment, he removed the bedding so he wouldn't dirty it and lay directly on the wooden plank beneath. His hand instinctively curled around the familiar black iron stick he always kept close. That stick, discovered in a heap of garbage years ago, had become his closest companion and most dependable weapon. Its sharpness and durability had helped him survive more than once. As he drifted toward sleep, he murmured inwardly, "Tomorrow, I'll look for a place to buy white pills." His meager savings, along with a few small gemstones he had hidden away, would hopefully be enough, but he also knew the rule of the slums: carrying wealth invited danger. He had witnessed countless tragedies caused by nothing more than envy and desperation. Eventually exhaustion overtook him, and the calm night passed quietly. When the morning sun rose, Xu Qing was already awake and stepping out of his small house. A quick glance toward Captain Lei's room showed no sign of the old man. Perhaps he had gone out early, so Xu Qing began walking the paths of the scavenger campsite. He quickly noticed the change in people's gazes. The scene of him cutting out the snake gallbladder yesterday had clearly shaken many of them. Now, instead of dismissive looks toward a thin youth, he received wary gazes, some respectful, some cautious. Even the young scavengers who usually skulked around with hollow eyes now watched him with faint envy. In this place, dignity was something carved out by one's own hands, not freely given. Xu Qing had earned it, and that simple truth settled into his heart with quiet certainty. As he walked, he observed everything. Wild dogs roamed through the alleys, some starving, some bristling with feral strength. They barked, snapped at scraps, and fought each other, acting no different from many of the people here. The more Xu Qing saw, the more he refined the mental map of the campsite forming inside his mind. Every path, every cluster of buildings, every hidden corner, he committed them all to memory. When his map felt complete, he ventured toward the inner circle area where structures were sturdier and shops more organized. There, He found a large establishment bustling with activity. People entered and exited constantly, and displays filled with various goods lined the inside. He paused outside for a moment, observing the flow of customers. It was then he noticed the girl from the night before, now dressed in staff clothing. She hurried between shelves and counters, sweat running down her forehead as she worked. When she finally noticed him entering, her eyes widened slightly, but before she could greet him, a scavenger grabbed her by the arm and began interrogating her about some item. Xu Qing shifted his attention to the other customers. 7 people in total were inside. Some browsed, some argued over prices. 2 of them, a skinny man with a long horse-like face and a fat man with a rotund belly, clearly came together. Their expressions were harsh, and faint waves of spiritual pressure radiated from them. The fat one, in particular, was scolding the girl impatiently, as if her answers were testing his temper. Only after assessing the room did Xu Qing finally look toward the shelves. As he expected, this was a general goods store. They sold alchemy pills, simple weapons, clothing, preserved food, and even miscellaneous survival tools. If something could be found in the scavenger campsite, chances were it could be bought here. Once he confirmed this, he stepped toward the counter. Behind it sat the shopkeeper, an older man with an unmoving, indifferent expression. He smoked slowly from a pipe, barely acknowledging the people bustling around his store. Xu Qing stopped before him, calm and steady. Hence, he retracted his gaze and walked to the counter. He then calmly spoke as he looked at the shopkeeper who had an indifferent expression when he smoked a pipe. In this episode, we saw Xu Qing's journey take several decisive turns as he struggled for survival, strength, and a sliver of dignity within the harsh environment of the scavenger campsite. Across these 5 merged episodes, Xu Qing faced deadly mutated beasts, fought fiercely to acquire the valuable serpent gallbladder, and pushed his body through an intense breakthrough that sharpened his senses and strengthened his resolve. We also witnessed how a small act of help created an unexpected bond with the timid girl, who returned later to express her gratitude. Throughout the events, Xu Qing learned more about the cruelty of human nature in the camp, how respect only comes to those who seize it themselves. At the same time, he carefully observed his surroundings, mapped out the campsite in his mind, and began planning his next steps toward securing medicine to deal with the dangerous, harmful energies lingering inside his body. By the end, he arrived at a bustling general goods store, ready to acquire what he needed and continue shaping his path forward. What happens next? Stay tuned for the next episode of Outside of Time. If you enjoyed this episode or found it intriguing, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to receive notifications about the latest installments in Xu Qing's journey. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.